Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode, and of course today we are talking about some of the aftermath of the emergency ban list that was just dropped. And yes, I know it technically doesn't seem like an e-ban list, but it was just 2 months ago that we had the last ban list that hit Halki Fibrax, Chaos Ruler, and Fairy Tail Snow, so in my mind, this is an emergency list. Yesterday, Tom discussed the changes and how they would impact the meta. Well, today I'm going to take a look at the immediate aftermath on the market. We are primarily going to look at cards that were directly affected by the list, and in the next couple of days, of course, we'll take a look at some other cards that have moved in price as a direct result of this list after the market has had a few more days to settle down. Let's get started. Kicking things off, let's first take a look at Macrocosmos. So honestly, this is one of the scariest cards that we are seeing come off the list. At our local OTS championship this past weekend, I was playing Ishizu Tearlament and had to play against Flu Wanderers in my top 4 match. My opponent opened with Macrocosmos, I opened with Heartbeat to out it, but my opponent had Solemn Judgment, so I ended up losing. Anyways, Macro to 3 is kind of crazy. This card has been limited ever since 2013, which is the list where Konami decided to give the TCG and OCG separate ban lists altogether. On one hand, I don't think many people were expecting this card to come off the list at all because it's so powerful even at 1, and I think that with this card at 3, it's just really insane. But then again, the card is at 3 in the OCG and they seem to be surviving with it over there. At any rate, this is not just a hard counter to Ishizu Tearlament, but it's also a big boost to the Kashtira strategy, which gets its next wave of support in Photon Hypernova early next year. That's probably a big part of why this card got peeled off now of all times. I'm fully expecting this card to be run at 3 in decks like Flu Wanderers and Exosister, allowing them to keep up with Ishizu Tearlaments, which is either really great or really awful depending on which deck you're playing. Anyways, in terms of price, Macrocosmos went really crazy. This card only has a few different printings, but they're all fairly old as the card has been limited for such a long time. These super rares from Dark Revelation 4 are the hardest to find printing. Those are going to cost you about $250 to $300 a piece, obviously like a crazy price tag for a very difficult to find card. Next up, we have the DT version. This is actually fairly reasonable at about $10 each. Then we have the Ultras. There's actually 2 different ultra rare printings, one from Legendary Collection Generation X, and then the Raw Yellow Mega Pack as well. Either of those versions is going to cost you between like that $15 to $20 range. And then the really crazy thing is that this card actually has 2 common printings, but because of how old those are, each of these is actually going to run you about $7 to $8. Obviously, like, that's a lot for a common card. I think that the day that the ban list actually dropped, we were seeing these go for like 15 to 20 each. Obviously, the prices have cooled down and become a little bit more reasonable within the last few days. Looking ahead, I don't know exactly where it is that this card is going to get reprinted. It could be in an OTS tournament pack. Aside from that, I don't see too many amazing products that could include this, aside from like a random inclusion in Amazing Defenders. Maybe it's being included in the Duelists of Shadow Speed Duel box that's coming out in March, or we just had that Maze set that was announced that's including some cool reprints as well. I don't know guys, usually I'm a big fan of holding off and not buying cards that have gone from 1 to 3 on the list, since they're usually just like a lot of fluff, they're not going to be super impactful. But on this one though, I do actually think that this is going to be a big one that's going to cause the card to stay up in price quite high because of its meta relevance until it gets that reprint. Next up, we're taking a look at Dimensional Fissure. So actually, when we really look at it, Dimensional Fissure runs very parallel to Macrocosmos. Obviously, it's a spell instead of a trap, so this will allow players to get around like a Havness a little bit better. It also only sends monsters to the graveyard, so if it's a spell, trap, or an Xyz material that tries to go to the graveyard, it does not get banished. Not too sure how relevant that is going to be this format, I guess only in like really specific situations, but it's still worth noting. But yeah, just like with Macro, I fully expect this card to be utilized by decks like Flu Wanderers and Exosister in order to counter Ishizu Tearlaments, and it's probably going to be enough to level the playing field between the decks just a little bit more. Oddly enough, D-Fissure is extremely similar to Macrocosmos in terms of its print history and pricing. So we have Super D-Fissures, but this one was from back in a Champion pack. Those are going to cost you about $200 each. D-Fissure was also a secret rare in the 2 places where Macro was an Ultra, so the Raw Yellow Mega Pack and Legendary Collection Generation X. Those versions of D-Fissure are right around the 15 to 20 mark as well. Now, instead of the DT printing, D-Fissure got an ultra rare printing in Duelist Saga, which is also about 15 to 20 right now. And then of course, it also has a couple of common printings, but because of how old those printings are, they're currently gonna run you just under the $10 mark each. So yeah, exact same thing as Macro, where I don't know exactly where they're going to reprint it. We're just past reprint season, so with Mavens and Crystal Revenge all done already, I don't know exactly where D-Fissure and Macro are going to be reprinted, but with how useful these cards are in the Ishizu tier limit matchup, and Ishizu tier obviously being the best deck of the current format, expect these cards to retain a fairly high price point over the next couple of months until their reprint is eventually announced. Up next, we're looking at a couple of different Ixies monsters, and the first is the card that was actually moved off of the list, straight from banned all the way to 3. It is Tellarknight Ptolemaeus. Ptolemaeus is a card that wasn't in the game for very long. This card came out in Crossed Souls, and almost exactly a year later, it was banned alongside several Pepe cards like Plushfire and Monkey Board on an emergency ban list that was very much needed to keep Performapals from being too overpowered. Basically, Ptolemaeus is a generic rank 4 monster where if you use 3 level 4 monsters as material, you can detach them to turn this card into any rank 5 non-numbered monster. So back then you could use this to make Constellar Diamond, which we'll talk about next, or more commonly people used Cyber Dragon Nova to go into Cyber Dragon Infinity, who could then absorb an opponent's monster as well as provide an Omni Negate. This was actually really game breaking at the time, but to be honest, like in the context of today's game, it kind of seems underwhelming. Like, why would I want to burn 3 level 4 monsters to go into a negate that also takes up 3 of my extra deck slots, right? A little bit silly, but it's still cool for people to think about, I suppose. Anyways, because of how short-lived this card was, it only has 2 different versions from the same set. So as an ultra rare and an ultimate rare, it didn't even get a Megaton reprint. For right now, we're seeing the ultimate rares between $30 to $35 depending on if you're looking for a first edition or unlimited copy. And then for the ultras, they're right at around $15 a piece too. Nothing too crazy, especially for a card that, in my opinion, isn't going to see a crazy amount of usage in the modern era. That being said, I definitely think that this card's price is a bit bigger of an overreaction to the ban list once we have a couple of events over the next couple of weeks, with people trying out the card and the card not really making too many top cut lists. We should see the card trend back down slowly until an eventual reprint brings its price all the way down. Next, I know that this isn't a card that was on the list itself, but it may as well have been because it went perfectly in hand with Ptolemaeus. It is Tellarknight Constellar Diamond. This is a rank 5 monster that I've never actually seen anyone hard make. I think I've only seen it used by putting it on top of Ptolemaeus. However, this card is actually a pretty useful floodgate monster. While it has Ixies material, neither player can send cards from the deck to the graveyard, and any card that returns from the graveyard to the hand is banished instead. Obviously really good because it prevents Ishizu tier from basically playing the game or milling anything at all. It has another effect where if an opponent's dark monster uses its effect, you can detach a material from this card and destroy the thing you're negating. Overall, this is actually a really good card, and if we do see any deck actually going into Ptolemaeus, I think it would definitely be used to go into Diamond as a floodgate rather than using it to try to make Cyber Dragon Infinity. So obviously with Ptolemaeus banned, this card didn't see any play at all, so it was only ever printed in Secrets of Eternity as an Ultra and Ultimate Rare, and then as an Ultra in the Megatons from its year as well. For the Ultimate Rares, you're looking at around $40 each, and then for the Ultras, you're looking at around $20 for the originals, and then $15 for the Megaton reprints, which is still a decent amount. This card used to be much cheaper. Ultis used to be like 10 to 15, and Ultras were only a couple of dollars. If you do happen to have this card lying in your bulk somewhere, or you can dig it up, I definitely look to offload your extra copies for the most part. Maybe keep that 1 copy of this and a Ptolemaeus for yourself, just in case you want to use it in an extra deck in the near future. I could definitely see this package being good given the landscape of the current meta, but I could also see it kind of flopping and underperforming. And just in case it gets reprinted, I don't think that you guys want to be holding on to too many copies of this card. Up next, another card that went from limited to unlimited status, it is Metaverse. So Metaverse has been limited to 1 ever since the release of Mystic Mine, which does make sense. A trap that can activate Mystic Mine directly out of your deck would have been crazy at 3. Now, with Mystic Mine banned, I think that the assumption is that Metaverse isn't nearly as broken, since the quality of the targets that you can pull out of the deck aren't theoretically going to be as impactful. However, there are definitely a few good field spells that decks will be able to use and try to take advantage of Metaverse, such as Necro Valley, Runic Fountain, and Zombie World. Metaverse can actually be set out of the deck with Trap Trick as well, so theoretically, you could be playing 9 copies of those field spells, and lots of players are thinking that Necro Valley and Zombie World are going to be really strong this format against Ishizu Tearlament and Floowandereeze respectively. Fortunately, Metaverse has a lot of lower rarity printings, as I think that it has been reprinted in a few different structure decks as commons. Of course though, people have turned to the holo versions to try to buy them out. We have just 2 versions, the secret rares from the original Speed Duel box. Those versions actually look really awesome, but they're also kind of expensive. They used to be around $15 to $20, and now they're up to about $30 a piece. The other holo version is a super rare printing from one of the OTS tournament packs. Those used to be a few bucks, but now they are up to $7 each. Now, depending on how this format looks, I could definitely see it getting a lot of good side deck play, since it is an effective way to stop Ishizu Tear and Floowandereeze. I would definitely stay away from these secret rares, even though they're really nice and they look great in your deck. I'm not really convinced that the value is going to hold there. I also think that the super rares look really good too, so if you guys don't want to play with commons and still want to bling out your deck, those supers are a great holo alternative that you guys should definitely consider picking up. Alright, so wrapping things up, we're taking a look at 2 cards that were actually hit on the list, and the first is the Herald of Orange Light. This emergency ban list that we're seeing here is definitely an interesting and unprecedented one. The problematic deck this format is Ishizu Tearlament, and in the past with E-ban lists, we usually see cards from the strategies themselves getting hit. So in Pepe format, we saw hits to cards like Monkey Board and Damage Juggler, and in the previous emergency ban list, we saw hits to Allure of Darkness, Dimension Fusion, and Return from the Different Dimension. This one was weird because the deck is Ishizu Tearlaments, but it's none of the Ishizu or Tearlament cards themselves that were actually touched by the list. Rather, some of the cards that are good against Ishizu Tear were released by the list, and the only card that Ishizu Tear was playing that actually saw a hit was Herald of Orange Light going to 1. Herald was a great hand trap for the Ishizu Tear strategy, being able to negate cards like Abyss Dweller and Dimension Shifter, which were obviously really big problems for the deck to face, and I guess the move wasn't that hard to see coming, since Orange Light was recently limited over in the OCG as well. However, I think it was definitely unexpected, given that we just got Orange Light reprinted in OTS Tournament Pack 20, because of how dominant Ishizu Tear has been, and how many people were using this card. Even with the reprint, Orange Lights were all quite expensive. The alties were crazy up at $160 a piece. Those have actually fallen way down to the $100 mark. And with the card being at 1, I think that they will continue to fall. For all the other printings, they're all in that like $5 to $10, maybe $15 range, depending on which version you're looking at. I actually think that the card should be even lower. Like, I think the commons should be like $1 or $2, because now all of those players that happen to have had a playset of this card for their own deck, they now have 2 more copies than they need, right? So the market should theoretically be full of them. I think the thing that's keeping them afloat is the fact that, like, people probably paid, $10, $12, $15 for them, and so they don't want to sell for less than $5. So those people are just going to keep their copies, and that's going to keep the price relatively high. This card isn't going to be gone from the meta completely. I think we should still expect Ishizu Tear to at least play the 1 copy that they have access to, since they are still going to be playing all of the different Ishizu cards, and maybe they could run a copy of Green Light or Purple Light to make up for the cards that they lost. But if you don't have this card and you do want to use it, maybe see if any of your buddies that were playing Tier Ishizu now have an extra copy that they don't need anymore. And last but not least, we have Mystic Mine. So for those of you that have seen my ban list predictions and such before, you guys know that I've always been of the opinion that Mystic Mine should be banned, and thank God it finally has happened. I don't really know what to say other than that, like, this card has always felt degenerate every time it hit the board, and I'm surprised that it survived for as long as it did, So after Mystic Mine survived the last ban list, people kind of went out and they panic bought Mystic Mine in all of its different printings. I think that at one point the secret rare copies were moving for as high as $25 to $30. Obviously the prices did cool down a bit, but with Mystic Mine helping decks like Exosister to see competitive success, Mystic Mine's price stayed relatively high. Now, however, the card is banned and has obviously tanked. We have these secrets at $7 to $8, the super rares at $5 to $6, and then the gold rares at $3 to $4. So let's be clear, I don't think that Mystic Mine will ever come off the ban list again. In my mind, it's right up there with cards like Painful Choice and Dimension Fusion, with how crazy impactful it can be and how it can never be allowed back into the game. However, I know some of you guys like collecting banned cards just in case, myself included, and that might inflate the price of Mystic Mine for a little while it's fresh on the ban list. But make no mistake, I think that Mystic Mine will continue to fall as everyone's care and reaction to this ban list gradually drops. People will just accept that Mystic Mine is gone, and in a few months, people are gonna find their copies of Mystic Mine and just think about how degenerate the card is and think, well, I'm never gonna need to use this card ever again. They're gonna list it and the price is going to deflate. Expect this card to continue dropping over the next few months, and if you are one of those banned card collectors, maybe hold off for a little bit before going out of your way to pick this card up. Alright everyone, that is it for today's episode. This ban list definitely injected some much needed change both into the meta and the price market overall. I remember thinking that there was just nothing changing and the format looked really stale. It's great to see that Konami noticed and actually decided to make a change as well. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure you let me know by slamming that thumbs up button for me. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards we talked about today and what other cards are trending on the market so I can cover them in future episodes. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.